And if you don't mind sharing the idea behind like income is a demographic filter, but if you think about it by location, it can
Sure.
often change the idea behind the return on ad spend.
Oh, right. So I think let's get back to like the fact that it's not just demographics, right? That sort of do this. We have to understand a little bit in sort of space and time. And actually, let me just share a graphic on my screen. It's just from a deck, that we had, but I think this will help illustrate the point as I talk through it. So hopefully, you can sort of see the motion here is we want to understand a couple different things, right? So let's first look at the top left corner. And this is just an image I made for a project actually in environmental sciences a while ago, but it really illustrates the point in terms of let's pretend that that sort of dot is, or at least one of those dots is a consumer, right? And they're out in the landscape, they're in the real world. And so there are so many different factors that come together to create the understanding of how that purchase occurred. And we're often ignoring sort of that three-dimensional aspect to it and the fact that there were, a lot of neighboring values that sort of came to it. You can think of it almost as let's think of it as a raindrop, right? And so, if, for instance, you have a brick and mortar store or you're doing direct to consumer, like with a lot of Amazon stuff, how did they have that decision that allowed them to become a consumer? And so, there's so many things. It may be, for instance, how they drove to work that day and they're late and they're stressed. So then, and they're in a certain industry, they have a certain travel time to work, and that influences it. Maybe it's that they live in a really well to do neighborhood, they have high home value, high education. Maybe it's that they have an affinity for cats, whatever the case is. Maybe they have something that they're working on in their lives. We can actually take a lot of that information, and each data layer is a sort of a story, and it creates the book, right? We're storytellers. Everyone sort of says that in our industry, right? But what we're doing is looking at it from a much more three-dimensional ecosystem or business ecosystem wide perspective, and then we're trying to understand why that sale occurred there. So that's that image on the upper left. And then the other aspect of it is that if we look down on the lower part here, this is just basically each line is a state, and within that state we have different cities that are color coded, say all purple or a green. And then what you see is individual zip codes even within those cities. And as you notice this, as you're kind of following along and looking, what you'll end up seeing is that some of the cities and zip codes and regions, they all act together. However, there are others that are doing a completely opposite pattern at the same exact time, right? And so what we have here is different cohorts of different behavior in different regions. And to get at your point of income, right? Let's give the example of income in, say, California or Los Angeles, right? If someone their household is earning, let's say 150, 200K in California or Los Angeles, and I've said this many times to different people, is that has a certain value. You may actually be struggling if you're living in LA there, depending on your situation, even earning 150 or 200K a year. Not so if you are living in some other rural part of the country, right? So in this case, you may know demographically that income is important for your consumer base. But what you don't know is that relationship to income changes dramatically over space and over time across the nation. And the more you understand that, which is not easily, gotten at by the case of just knowing your demographics, that you have a high income group that likes to purchase your product or low or whatever it is, that would be doing a great disservice in terms of truly understanding and your ability to target your consumer group.
Totally. And I think like if we're imagining a seller who they believe they know internally, our product resonates with they think high income audience, what they
Mm-hmm.
might uncover by looking at geographical data is that it's really a high disposable income audience. And so you could actually layer in different incomes in different locations. So maybe LA is over $250,000 annual income,
Mm-hmm.
whereas, rural America, it's actually maybe 100 to 150, and you can actually layer in the demographic with the geographical to really find your target customer.
Yeah, and I think what is really interesting for me is that we're getting a little bit at geo-causality, right? Like, what does space and time and location have to do with the additive ability to predict the likelihood that something's going to happen? Like, we just recently had a gigantic snowstorm here on the East Coast, and during that time, for instance, I had a client whose product actually really went down during that time frame because it was influencing a vast quantity of their potential consumers, right? But then there was a nice rebound afterwards. So understanding sort of the ability of certain things independent of demographics to potentially influence your sale is also really important. And we use atypical data sets all the time, things that are not often used in marketing. So an example of one that and I won't tell you what industry because it's one of the magical things about the model we created for this industry, is, for instance, you can use geological data, meaning superficial geology and soil moisture content actually predicts the occurrence when you combine it with yard size and other things where this particular industry's client base will be. And then income is also very important to that. But we were able to predict their clusters of historical consumers and where they were selling really well with about 89% accuracy. They utilize that in geo-targeting to ignore the rest of the areas and focus on these areas that were match markets that they had not reached out to yet before. And the end result of that is they had the best year in their history in terms of leads in a single month. And so that to me is the way that we want this to work. We want to look at our data beyond demographics, though including those. We want to create a complex model specific to your sales, right? We'll take your sales data and work with that and incorporate that into the model. It's your golden goose, if ever there was one, like never get rid of your data. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little more complex than just understanding demographics or not. And I alluded to that a little bit there.